Mayor of Cork County, Councillor Mary Linehan Foley, Councillor Joe Kavanagh, deputising for the Lord Mayor of Cork, Lieutenant Colonel Padra Cohan, Sergeant Roy Kelleher, Canon Humphrey O'Mahony, Superintendent Gary McPolin, Cahirlock of Dunleary, Councillor Jim Gildea, members of the Collins families, colleagues, friends, good afternoon everyone. It's an immense personal and professional honour to be with you today as we join again to commemorate the life and death of our most important, most effective and our most visionary political leader, Michael Collins. I thank my great friend, Senator Garrett Kelleher, Chairman of the Commemoration Committee, and the members of the Michael Collins Commemoration Committee, both for your trust in me to deliver today's oration, and indeed much more, for your ongoing dedication, thoughtfulness, and commitment to this commemoration. I do recognise that as a Dáil representative from Dunleary, I am not exactly from the next townland, but can I say today how proud Dunleary is of its association with Michael Collins. There are memories of Collins all around my constituency. In the Royal Marine Hotel, where I was first nominated to be an election candidate, Collins is believed to have hidden out in room 210 with his partner, Kitty Kiernan. Whenever Collins wanted to receive a secret intelligence briefing from David Nelligan, his agent in the Dublin Metropolitan Police, he cycled out to Blackrock and waved to passing auxiliary patrols en route, and then usually met in a pub opposite Blackrock College. When the Cork-born Republican Tig Barry and a group of other revolutionaries were released from prison in England, and they returned to Ireland via Holyhead and greeted in Dunleary by a Dáil delegation led by Collins. And after he signed the treaty in London, hoping to bring an end to all violence and give Irish people a different future, Collins returned home via Dunleary, carrying the hopes and dreams of a nation. Can I say that we in Fine Gael and Dunleary see today as a collective honour, and I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the very many who have travelled, led by our first citizen Cahirlock, Councillor Jim Gildea, and my great friends, Councillor Mary Baker and Councillor Jacqueline Burke. I also recognise the presence of so many of my Oireachtas colleagues here today, and they all know who they are. But can I say that I have spent really some considerable time thinking and preparing for this honour since Senator Kelleher invited me some weeks ago. Recognising that I'm a political scientist and a practising politician, I gravitated not to the books of historical record as such, but to the more contemporary records of those many speakers who came here before me, voices reaching across the decades, voices of political leaders, of historians, of the sons and daughters of Cork and Munster, voices from the UK and from the north of our island, and voices from Collins' own family. What struck me was that these speeches were not just reflections of Collins and his legacy, but they were in fact mirrors of Ireland itself, evolving through time. Each speaker brought their own lens shaped by the issues of their day, from Breed Rogers' reflections on the Troubles, to Avril Doyle's focus on unemployment and political reform, Enda Kenny's thoughts on security and public order, to Heather Humphrey's emphasis on peace and progress, to Sean Kelly's considerations of sport as a tool of integration on this island. Each speech tells a story not just of Collins, but of Ireland's journeys. And in that sense, can I suggest maybe the commemoration of Collins and its careful curation and custodianship by the Commemoration Committee has in fact become its own arc of history, its own historical event through which the reflection of the day and the vision of tomorrow can be found through those given the honour to stand here in this revered place. I was particularly drawn to Brendan O'Reilly's speech from 1980, Brendan being both the writer of the Ballad of Michael Collins and the first, as I understand it, non-political speaker at this oration. Brendan O'Reilly noted a phrase he says Collins used to describe himself, which was that I think in long strides. And if I may, is what I titled this oration today, Thinking in Long Strides. So I ask you to join me to think today in long strides, and let me perhaps set out an arc of history from 1922 to where we are today, to the vision of where we must go. The vision of Collins as a state creator and a state builder and the realisation of that vision through the defence and development, stone by careful stone, of the building of the political, economic and social institutions of the Irish state to where it is today. I'm often struck by the poem Scaffolding by Seamus Heaney, because though in reality it's a poem about a couple building their relationship to sustain the challenges ahead, for me there is a resonance with the exacting stone by stone building of a state. And Heaney begins, masons, when they start upon a building, are careful to test out the scaffolding, making sure the planks won't slip at busy points, secure all ladders, tighten bolted joints. And yet all this comes down when the job is done, showing off walls of sure and solid stone. It was Collins who laid the foundation stones for building the walls of the Irish state, the defence forces, the Gardaí, the beginnings of our judicial system. It was Collins who laid the foundation stone. Quite right. Exactly. It was Collins who laid the foundation stones for the constitutional architecture of the state that has ensured democratic freedom, the central tenet of the rule of law, fair, accessible courts, and the principles of human rights, equality, and tolerance that have been the essence of our constitutional democracy since. My great friend Michael Noonan, standing here in 2001, said that Collins was the man who, more than anybody else, can rightly be described as the father of Irish democracy. Previous speakers here through time charted the development of our political institutions, the peaceful transfer of democratic power, the need for our courts to stand hard and stand firm against the threat of dissidence to the nascent state, and the need for the protection of those courts through an enduring reverence for the constitutional principle of separation of powers. The need to look outwards to protect our people at home, both looking outwards to ensure economic growth and then looking outward to Europe to join a bigger market to enable the economic opportunity we needed. To grow the lives and wealth and opportunity of a people on an island in the North Atlantic seeking its own sovereign vision, its own resilience for the future, independent of the strictures and dependencies of the past. But we also see, through the speakers before, the very great challenges this state faced. Avril Doyle laments the scourge of persistent, structural, seemingly unending unemployment and the damage done by political corruption of its day. Enda Kenny and Brian Lenihan recount the damage done to the state by the volatility in public finances through unsustainable reliance on transactional taxes and a failure to appropriately regulate crucial financial institutions. The path to peace in Northern Ireland is chronologically articulated by so many, including Breed Rogers, Austin Curry, Nora Owen, Simon Coveney, and the late, and can I say great, Tommy Gorman. And now for this reader, or now this orator, one perhaps of a newer generation of speakers to come, one of a newer generation born more in the time of the hunger strikers rather than before the Troubles began. Now we know those my age and younger simply assume peace. And children today will only ever, we hope, understand the Troubles as the ghost story to be told to wains, prophesied by Grandpa Joe and Derry Girls. The only route I hope our children really may now have to culturally understand the daily horrors faced by those on these islands for so many decades that all of us saw on television every night. But the Irish state responded to the challenges our speakers saw. The Irish people responded and built our sovereign state brick by resilient brick, the enduring walls of this state, protecting the political institutions, delivering public services and correcting the single points of failure. And now we have a diverse tax base, robust ethics in public office, full employment, one of the longest life expectancies in Europe, a most educated population and crucially a peaceful and growing state. We have created an Ireland that is home to the top financial, technological and agricultural science companies globally. And we've created institutions that can manage complex democratic processes like our electoral and referendum commissions, which stand in contrast to the challenges enabled by their absence elsewhere, most notably Brexit. Collins gave us this vision: peaceful, outward-looking, economically strong and grounded in the rule of law. And notwithstanding the pressing need to be effective in the operational issues of the day, as every political leader must be, but thinking as well in long strides about his vision for his state, his country, and for our future. And so now, so as ever, so must we. We must now set the arc of history forward and imagine what is next. Having built the walls of a successful and resilient state, what is our next ambition? We have to stop now being surprised by our own success and decide that it is our entitlement from a century of endeavour and improvement. We know that as a small island, we will always be susceptible to the vagaries and challenges from abroad. But we build our foundation stones now, not in fear of this, but in anticipation of being impacted by the twists and turns of the rest of the world. So we must build our foundation stones higher now to set our new baseline. We decide what confidence we will have. We decide now what next to ensure that our small island in the North Atlantic defends and develops its position in the world for the benefit of our people. We think now in our own long strides. May I suggest 2 new foundation stones as being essential for the confidence we should expect for our future. 1 is energy security, and 2 is enduring sovereign wealth. First, energy security. We have seen from the geopolitical movements of the decade that energy security is no longer desirable, but it is an absolute imperative. Collins himself spoke of accessing and maximising the natural resources of this state, our lakes, our rivers, fish, minerals and coal. But he could not have foreseen that we would one day generate energy from wind, clean, beautiful and abundant. We must demand that Ireland become self-sufficient through the clean exploitation of our own natural resources. We must know that we can keep our own lights on without support from abroad. This is the essence of a sovereign, independent, resilient people. To those who object to the development of solar and wind energy in different places, I say, please no. Please think in long strides. This is not a short-term issue. Energy security is integral to our sovereignty. And fortunately, we are a small island in the North Atlantic, and so we can build it and build it well. The second is its enduring sovereign wealth. For too long, Ireland has endured boom-bust cycles with appalling consequences for our public finances and, more importantly, for our people. And we've learned from those painful lessons. Fine Gael has in the past decade, brought our public finances back to surplus, not once but twice, after the financial crisis and after COVID. We have reduced our single points of failure, diversified our tax base, and reformed state landholding through long-term, counter-cyclical institutions like the Land Development Agency. But I suggest it's not enough. It's not enough for Ireland Next 2.0. The Future Ireland Fund marks a turning point, a long stride. For the first time now, Ireland has the real potential to build genuine, enduring sovereign wealth. A fund which, if we can have the political discipline, and we have it in Fine Gael, if we have the political discipline alone to just leave it develop over the decades to come, to give the policymakers of tomorrow a totally different level of confidence, to know that in the downturn, the interest becomes a portion of the current budget, and to know that we can continue to contribute to the world abroad while protecting our own at home. These 2 long strides combined, knowing the lights are on and not fearing energy price shocks, and knowing we have the big fund in the back pocket. For a small island in the North Atlantic, so open to the rest of the world, it's a resilience we've never had before. It's a level of sovereignty we've never had before. May I make 2 other comments about sovereignty? 1, Michael Collins established our defence forces and a real openness to the world. Indeed, this week we just read of his efforts to establish a French airbase in Cork, politics always being somewhat local, I suppose, much like the absolute necessity for the new Navy base to be in Dunleary. I agree. Enda Kenny, though, here in 2006, spoke about our pride in our defence forces in global peacekeeping missions with the United Nations. But the reality is we haven't been able to sanction a new peacekeeping mission since 2014 because we somehow in 2001 decided to hand the decision making about where we send our sovereign troops to an international body, to the UN Security Council, a body that includes both the forces ejected by Michael Collins and, more importantly now, includes countries shown to be nefarious imperialist forces. In this way, we have taken away our own sovereignty, as though we somehow are incapable of deciding where our peacekeepers should be. How can that be? How can that be? Ireland is a country that looks abroad. Our foreign policy is open. It's entirely committed to the rule of law, entirely humanitarian, supportive of the global south, leaders in international aid. We absolutely condemn the utterly illegal and genocidal actions of Russia and Israel, and yet we handed our sovereign decision making to some of them because we cannot trust ourselves. This is not the thing of a sovereign people. There have been no new peacekeeping missions approved by the UN Security Council since 2014, the year Russia first invaded Ukraine again. We cannot be held by others. We must remove the triple lock and take charge of our own affairs and be held to account for our own decisions. That is the essence of constitutional democracy. The second point I hope to make about sovereignty is that the role of politics really still remains central to state building. And yet, politics today faces its own new challenges, not just in policy, but in conduct. We have to acknowledge the pressures and dangers faced by those in public life over time. Collins was killed here. Kevin O'Higgins was killed in my own constituency. The legacy of political violence is real. And while we really are far from that today, we can't be complacent either. In her speech, Heather Humphreys spoke about the murder of Senator Billy Fox, a reminder that political violence is not a distant memory, it's still a lived understanding. And we've seen it very recently in the UK, in the USA, and across Europe. The threat of violence feels remote, but the threat to the functionality and purity of democracy through disinformation is present every single day. Now, we all know disinformation has always existed. Like there was always someone standing outside a church or a town hall saying something wrong about this fella or that fella. There's nothing new. But what is new is the power to amplify it instantly, globally, and often anonymously. What's more troubling is the influence of foreign actors who deliberately agitate against democratic institutions, against science, and against the very idea of democratic government. It's not just noise, it's a threat to the functioning of democracy. Can I say that we saw this recently when Dr. Tony Holohan, the former chief medical officer of this state, chose to exclude himself from electoral politics, not for direct personal reasons as such, but because of the inevitable impact of abuse on his family. When a man of science decides it's simply not worth it, that's not a good moment for any of us. Whatever your political allegiance, that kind of self-exclusion is a loss for public life. And I do say this. I do say this with full awareness of where we stand today in this hallowed valley, commemorating a man who was shot and killed for his political vision. Cribbing about internet disinformation feels almost unfit to utter here. But it is part of the modern dissident threat, and it has implications. It erodes public trust. It erodes truth, and it erodes the willingness to serve. And that is damaging to our sovereign democracy. Let me be clear. We can and we should debate the issues in our society and in our politics. As is very clear from another most important commemoration this weekend for a beautiful young boy named Harvey. There are many ways our society can and should do better by its citizens. We can, we must, and we will do better. That is the essence of politics and always will be. But as we stand here, though, today, and reflect on the Ireland built so far on the foundation stones of Collins' work, we can reasonably ask ourselves, how have we done? What were our long strides? Where are our next ones? With what confidence will the next generation of orators speak? Children born not before the Troubles, not in the time of the hunger strikers, but in the days of the Derry Girls, and the born-to assumption of continued peace and prosperity. Heaney concludes his magnificent poem, "Never fear. We may let the scaffolds fall. Confident, we have built our wall." That is why the idea of thinking in long strides matters now more than ever, and acting thoughtfully, consciously, confidently, defending and developing this Irish state, its institutions, its outlook, and the very spirit of public service itself. For me, the message from this place is clear. We must commemorate those who built the walls of our state and now look ahead to nurture our future generations. We must encourage them to consider their commitment to the Irish state and ask them to consider public life and service and make it safe for them to do so. For one day they will stand here thinking in long strides. Thank you.